Dearest Facebook, we are with you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in here on Facebook Live. It's This Week in Mormon special post-conference unpacking edition. So thank you for being here on Facebook Live. This is a new territory for us because we adapt technology as quickly as Quentin L. Cook. We are excited to be here to make things happen. Anywho, we got a panel going this week, so I want to introduce everybody, and then we're going to get into conference and talk about the weekend, which was, pretty uneventful. So I hope we can find ways to have things. First with me, of course, is my dear co-host Al Doan from This Week in Mormons. Al surprised us all and decided to hop on tonight. Hi, buddy.
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me, everybody.
Always a pleasure. Next up, you know him from LeadingLDS.org, the host, the man of LeadingLDS. Kurt Francom is in the house.
Hey, it's your newest member of the Elders Quorum. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, Kurt's been a bishop and like a stake president, a mission president, whatever else.
Yeah,
blah, blah.
Don't forget to mention my resume, Geoff. I appreciate that.
Great job, Kurt.
I have advanced to the many priesthoods in the history of my time in the church.
Okay. Now, next in the line, from the Talks on Talks podcast, a podcast that breaks down conference talks one by one, if I'm not mistaken, Wes Eggett is here with us.
Hello. Happy to be here. Did it glitch out?
I'm happy you're here too, Wes.
Thanks. Did it just make it really awkward? Sorry, a glitch. Blame it on the technology.
And then the TWiM sisters. See, this is what I do. I fill in.
Hello. We're here from Idaho.
Geoff, throwing it back to you, buddy.
Wes did not seem thrilled.
No, I didn't. Oh, no, I'm ecstatic. Sorry. Here we go.
Come on,
Look, we're both Californians. I know what it means to be chill.
That's right. It's in the blood.
The way Geoff handles not being thrilled is silence.
Now,
which brings me to my next point. At least the screen freezes on like the most flattering picture of Geoff ever. Right? Like this could be the album cover. Well, maybe his internet was not prepared for this. Oh.
We're overloading it.
No, just for Geoff. I don't know. This is so sad. He was so excited. Okay, well, so guys, Kurt, do you know what's going on here?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is talk about conference, right? Give us a good all-around recap. Is that we've lost our host. We're just wandering in the desert.
We're participants just wandering.
Well, I think a good place to start would probably be the Solemn Assembly, right? Because
that's where they decided to start, so we can start there.
Dude, that was pretty surreal. I forget that we even do that, honestly.
Yeah, I forgot too. I mean, it had been,
10 years. So, it'd been a while.
And we gathered our kids around thinking, oh, yeah, we got to tell them what this is. They've never seen this.
I tried to gather my
General Conference? I just got back. Were you telling about General Conference?
No, we're going into the Solemn Assembly.
Oh, man. Okay, fine. Keep talking. My internet went out for no reason. I'm back. Anyway, keep talking.
I was just saying, I tried to gather my teenagers and explain to my teenagers the significance of this, and they were kind of meh about it. They will be sorry later on.
Yeah, once they get another Hinckley in there, that takes 20 years for anything to change over.
Exactly.
No,
I thought it was pretty awesome. I didn't remember much in the way of Solemn Assembly from President Monson, so I dug it. I felt the spirit. It was a good time.
Yeah, and it's always fun to stand up in your living room or wherever you're at, and when your quorum or group is called, and participate in your own way.
Yeah.
it's always funny the moment, because I remember for President Monson, I had a similar reaction, but like they looked different. President Nelson looked different. Like the mantle had fallen on him, and he was very much more prophet-y. This, seeing him in the sessions and stuff. I always think it's just kind of a remarkable thing that they can go from the fun. He was the fun, goofy one in my mind. Like he was the troublemaker in the Quorum of the 12. And then he gets up there and he's like, no, it's all business now. It's a real deal. Got that steely look in his eyes. Yeah.
Yeah. For the first time ever, he seemed like he meant business.
And boy, did he mean business.
It's all jokes before then.
He overhauled everything.
So, Al, you sent me a tweet though earlier today. Where did that picture come from? There's a picture of. I'm assuming.
Oh, that's so good.
He's on some kind of a swing in his backyard, looking as giddy as can be. Anybody else ever seen this?
Oh yeah, I saw that today. Yeah.
It looks amazing. He's just in the backyard of some Utah subdivision.
It's,
Like, is this a recent picture?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
let's
Yeah.
look. It's right here. Check it out.
Oh.
Ah,
Dude,
he's so
tell me that's
happy.
not amazing.
Okay,
So happy.
That's fun.
He's like, what else, folks? He pretty much was, I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful of the president of the church, but he was just kind of like the rock star all weekend, wasn't he? He just,
yeah.
Yeah, and it was so different after President Monson's health decline and hardly hearing from him for so long. It was kind of a shock to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kept getting up to the pulpit, and every time he got up, something big happened. You kind of wanted to go, dude, don't get up anymore. How much of this can we take?
That was Holland's joke, right? Where he's like,
Yeah.
our hearts, they can't take it, but you can even fix those. So.
And then he
keep
came at it with the temples at the end too.
Yeah.
going. Oh man,
That was a dirty move.
The
Let's be
hammer.
honest, folks. Now, I know that we can do things differently. There's no set rule for how you organize conference and who does what. I think we're used to how things work for 10 years under President Monson. But, man, I was sitting there saying, all right, he hasn't mentioned it yet. There's one last shot when he does his little, hey, y'all, thanks for coming. You know, tip your waitress. Have a great weekend. Thanks for coming to conference. And then just lays it down. And you could tell how much he was enjoying himself.
Oh, yeah. That was the
Oh, yeah.
biggest part of it.
President Nelson does not have a poker face when he's trying to hide the enjoyment of the gravitas of everything. He's
Oh, and then he goes through 6 and like sort of pauses, looks back, brings it back around. Russia.
Boom.
pause for effect. Russia. But by the way, think about this too. The Russia temple, they don't even know which city it's going to go in yet, which is definitely not typical protocol. I mean, usually we seem to like these things ironed out in advance. So I have to wonder what's behind just saying, we're going to build one in Russia, just somewhere, but we'll let you know.
Which reminds me, tonight I was at dinner with my family. My sister, who lives in Riverton, mentioned that President Hinckley, I guess, when he announced the Ochre Mountain Temple, he announced another temple that was supposed to be in that part of the valley, which
I remember something like that.
got addressed. So I don't know. Sometimes they announce them, and we just cross our fingers, right?
Yeah, I mean, there have been temples that have been announced and then never built, like Harrison, New York.
Ukraine took what, 7, maybe 9 years before they picked a spot?
Yeah, Ukraine took a long time.
Yeah, and Rome is well
was
past a
rare.
decade, right?
And then you got the other side of it with Rome, which they announced like 10 years ago, and then it's just taken, like they've been building it for like 8 years. It's just taken forever in actual construction. Who knows? But anyway, for those who missed it, so where do we have new temples? Since we're on it, we're starting backwards, like the movie Memento, starting at the beginning. The end. What do we get?
India.
Oh,
India.
India. Wait, why did Jeff? You predicted India. Why India?
So I'd long wondered if, with the way the church was going in India, they'd get a temple. It's not. We have like 3 stakes there. There's membership. It's not overwhelming or anything. But sometimes you build a temple because the members are very far from a temple. They have to go to Hong Kong right now. Once there's the Bangkok temple finished, they can go there. But still, it's a ways to go in an impoverished country. And sometimes, let's be honest, we want to make a statement, I think, in a country. Kind of, if you build it,
It helps the missionary work.
Yeah. So I figured, I used to think it would be in Hyderabad, but I don't know. I realized Bengaluru, which is Bangalore, seemed a better candidate. But the real kicker was President Nelson's going on this big worldwide ministry tour thing, like starting next month. I think it's in April, right? Or April or May. And every stop he's going on, other than Jerusalem, which is a bit of a different deal, every other place either has a temple or has an announced temple, except for Bengaluru, where he's also going. So I kind of figured, is he really going to go on this big worldwide tour to a bunch of spots that are clearly trying to pump up the temple-going folk and just show up in India and say, keep on keeping on, guys, someday for you, but everybody else. So I don't know. It's just
Like a Mormon PI. That was amazing.
just made sense. I was really stoked about Richmond, Virginia. They've long needed something down elsewhere.
I've never rolled my eyes harder than Layton, Utah, and Richmond, Virginia. Both of those, I'm like, you don't deserve this.
What was with the gasp for Layton? I mean, they need it up there, but it's not like when they did Provo City Semper, from the ashes of the tabernacle comes a temple. It's like, well, there's a Cracker Barrel, and across the street, folks, We're going to build you a temple.
That's no exaggeration.
It's not. Layton is strip malls and tract housing, which is perfectly fine if that's how you want to live, but there's no, it doesn't have.
It's much like Ochre Mountain.
I feel like my Utah peeps are expecting me to stand up for them, but I totally get it.
Yeah, we've been there.
Al, you need to be careful though, because Ochre Mountain Temple's in Daybreak, which is Kennecott's bliss on Earth for all of us to experience. I'm never going to denigrate Daybreak.
Whatever, Jeff.
Daybreak is my dream. It's my Stepford dream, and I want it.
It is everyone's dream.
Someday.
All right, we got a lot to cover, man.
There's lots to cover. Do we just got other temples? We got Cagayan de Oro, and Philippines is getting a temple.
Nicaragua, we have Nicaraguan brothers that are very excited.
We have long since called for Nicaragua, which actually makes the last Latin American country to get a temple, which is kind of cool.
Wow.
We figured it out. We got Salta, Argentina.
And they got an apostle. Imagine that.
Go figure, right? Well, he's Brazilian. I mean, he doesn't speak Spanish. He speaks that weird language.
It's Latin America, right? Is that...
Hey, that's Portuguese. Represent.
Yeah, Portuguese. I mean, whatever. Did you go to Brazil on your mission, Wes?
I did, yes. Yes, I did. I saw in your notes you said Tudo Bem. I was curious if you did as well.
Well, I learned a little bit of Portuguese. I mean, I went to Spain, you're right next to Portugal. You picked
Okay.
Right.
All right. See, now that people actually see this video, I can't do all my demeaning gestures to Jeff to keep the, oh, come on, let's go.
Okay. Now, normally we would structure this as we often have on our post-conference recaps. We just kind of go through talks and talk about feelings. I still want to do that, but a lot of junk happened in this, I don't want to call it junk. Many things transpired in this conference, right? So maybe we should lead off with some of that. I think that might be a good place to focus.
You're the boss, Jeff.
Our energy. No, Kurt, you are the erstwhile high priest now. You are.
Dude, I literally have a blog post drafted on TWiM called "Home Teaching is Ruining Service in the Church." like I'm not even like this. And every time I go to church and sit with the high priest, I'm like, maybe the church isn't true. I mean, that's the only moment where doubt creeps in. And like both of those were addressed this conference, and I was like, it was like a big warm hug. It's like, hey, no, we're thinking about how crappy this is.
The
we're
heavens
trying to fix
are
it
still
too.
open. Oh, it's beautiful.
So, let's
Has the day of miracles ceased? I say unto you, no.
Boom.
Al, you did write that article at one time that was why third hour is the worst hour of your entire week.
Yeah, that's a classic.
And I still stand by that.
Yeah.
Let's see if it improves.
So if anybody missed this, what happened in the priesthood session was first they had this guy from the Young Men's Presidency get up and basically check off, hey, we talked to the Aaronic priesthood holders. Now let's get into nitty-gritty for the remaining 110 minutes. And then President Nelson got up there and said, we are essentially ditching the high priest group, and we're combining high priests and elders together in a new elders quorum. It's still going to be the elders quorum, whether you're a high priest or an elder. It's an elders quorum. I think most of it will still function similarly, but high priest, well, there'll still be a high priest quorum in the stake, but they only meet sometimes, and it's only for those who have current callings pertaining to high priesthood. Correct? Am I getting that right, Kurt?
That sounds right.
And I think, on the church records, like those that are high priests will still be listed as high priests, and
sure.
But they just will attend elders quorum and report to the elders quorum presidency.
Now they said something interesting though. Is they said that there have been times, I think President Oaks said this, that elders can preside over high priests. I think that was said, which they would have to, which is interesting to me because I've always had an understanding that one of the main reasons when you're called to a bishopric, for example, is you're ordained a high priest so that you can preside over the ward, which is why also on the other side of that, like at BYU, I had guys who were just elders in my ward because they assumed you didn't have any high priests in your ward at BYU.
Well, then you had branches in the mission where you'd have an elder that was the bishop, right?
Well, you're branch president, you can be an elder though. You don't have to be a high priest to be a branch president.
But if you had a high priest in there, you would be presiding over them, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I just thought that was interesting though. So I'm wondering if now, does this set a precedent for counselors and bishoprics no longer being ordained high priests? Like, is this going to be a thing, or are they going to just stop doing it?
I think they mentioned that if they're called to a bishopric, they'll still be called as ordained as a high priest.
Okay.
And then they're part of the high priest quorum on the leadership
level.
On the stake one for the
stake
leadership
level with the stake president.
But if they were to go to like regular Sunday meetings, they would go to elders quorum.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
And then they'll have a routine high priest quorum meeting, which would be done outside of the 3-hour block.
This is
Man,
pretty
it seemed-
interesting. So what do you
it
guys
seemed
think
like
of this?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Al. Al, you have a lot of thoughts on this.
Well, I was gonna say, it seems like there's a lot of like one of the undertones of this session or of this conference was sort of the equality between men and women. Like the idea that visiting teaching can now use young women to go with them and visit teach, and like there's legit collaboration supposed to happen of like you're both grown up, the group of men and the group of women, figure out how to minister, go do this. It was really refreshing, I thought, to sort of have that approach or have that be an undertone in the messaging, I thought.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought they actually addressed was the idea that, like, if high priests are going to be attending an elders quorum, are they going to kind of take over elders quorum where they won't have any? Yeah, where he, like, are we going to have elders still as the presidents of the elders quorum, or will it be high priests? And the talk that you brought up about the Aaronic priesthood that was right before this, I really liked something he said, even though it was applicable in his talk to the Aaronic priesthood, it kind of applied here as well, where he told that story of he was a mission president. They set up baby chairs, the children's chairs for the new missionaries. And then he's like, no, we're sitting in the big chairs. And it kind of like, he knew that this was all coming, but at the same time, I think it could be applied to this, that we know that the elders need to be treated the same as the high priests in the elders quorum, that they're all welcome, that kind of accepting equality thing that Al was talking about.
Well, and I think just on what Al was saying with regards to the girls, that's one of the things that I really took out of this, at least for the young women, is they have now really tried really hard to put the young women on par with the young men and the responsibilities that the young men have. I mean, they're not the same responsibilities, but it's kind of seems a little more equalizing. I loved the idea of the ministering, and that the girls 14 through 18 would minister with older sisters, much like the boys who are 14 to 18 previously were home teaching companions, usually with their fathers.
I know, and it totally made sense when they said it. I was like, how come I've never thought about that before?
Yeah.
How does that make a difference? Like, what does that change sort of for a young woman, or like how they approach even coming into Relief Society? Is that a sort of a monumental shift, or is that like we were kind of already addressing this in our own ways to sort of bring young women into the Relief Society? And
you know what, having gone through, a transition myself many, many years ago from Young Women's into Relief Society, and now I've got a daughter who's preparing to do that, and I have another daughter who will be coming up in a year doing that. It's a real shock for these young women to go from Young Women's to Relief Society. There's not a lot of bridge that happens there. And I think with the shift that we have here, it's going to create more of a bridge, because I have always seen, where the men always go to gather for priesthood opening exercises, yet the Relief Society and the Young Women do very separate, different opening exercises. So the men are always there together for opening exercises. The young men then are learning how to be priesthood holders with their fathers, but there's not a lot of that same mentoring that goes on with the sisters. You have to make a conscious effort, and we think about this a lot in our ward, is as we're planning Relief Society activities, is this something that we can invite the young women to? Is this something we should be inviting the young women to kind of create that bridge? And I think it's going to create more of a natural bridge now, so that when young women transition from Young Women to Relief Society, it's not like they're sitting in there going, wow, I'm stuck with all these old women with gray hair, and they've all had children, and here I am, and I don't know what I want to do with my life, and I feel like I don't have anything in common. I think that they will already have relationships with some of those sisters, so it makes that transition a lot smoother and a lot easier.
Yeah, I think it'll help a lot. We've looked in wards where they've attempted to bridge that gap in different ways, and I just think to have a universal kind of method, I think that'll help.
And I'm glad you mentioned that mentorship aspect, because one thing I benefited so much from my youth experience is, my dad was home teaching companions with my older brother. So I went with another brother in the ward, and, I looked up to him. I learned from him, somebody outside of my father's example, and young women just don't have that opportunity as much, and now they will have that opportunity, which is, man, it's awesome.
Yeah, it'll be great.
We've got some comments on Facebook related to this. Should we read them? Yeah. So Nikki here said that my transition to Relief Society was rough, and she's grateful that there's a bridge there now. These are things I don't think about much as a guy, because like we didn't deal with this. And Jamie said, I think the only way, at least previously, that young women are transitioned into Relief Society is as a substitute visiting teacher with their mom when her partner is AWOL.
What?
Well, yeah.
Jean Bingham, who was so great, spoke after Elder Holland. She mentioned, or she just had a comment in passing where she talked about how this is. She said this is part of the restoration of all things, of like these programs sort of morphing and adjusting. And that was such a good reminder to me. I sort of paused and sat back in my seat. The idea that like we're slowly dialing it in, or that maybe the home teaching was the right program for the last X number of years. Just like the discussions were the right thing until we got to preach my gospel, that sort of idea. But just that it's like this, we're aiming to get to the perfect organization, and all these little things dialing in that still need to be changed in dramatic ways, right? The idea that like home teaching could be removed as we know it and a new program dropped in, that was great.
And I'm gonna push back on home teaching being removed. We're saying that, but I really think it's just been replaced.
I just like saying those words.
I know. Fair. And Al, I was thinking the same thing about the parallels with the missionary experience, right? I mean, way back in 2003, Preach My Gospel came out, but I remember feeling sort of perplexed in some ways, because the whole point of Preach My Gospel was, hey, don't recite discussions. Know your...
Yeah, it was what you were supposed to be doing anyway.
Know the people. I'm like, isn't this what we should be doing? Like, aren't this discussions just kind of guidelines to help us get there?
Yeah.
But because probably too many people were just relying on what was in front of them and not thinking about it, they were going through the motions. The church said, okay, let's fix this. Let's make it programmatic and embrace it at the highest level, even though this is what we should be doing. And I think this is exactly what's happening with ministering. Home teaching, in essence, should not be, you just show up, you read the first presidency message, which is now gone. So
this is a mind blow. What do you mean we're supposed to be kind to people and just love them?
You're supposed to know what's going on in their lives and just look out for the temporal and spiritual well-being of others. It's not that tall of an...
The metric they chose to track too is so interesting, right?
Essentially, if you're having PPI,
the number
PPIs,
of interviews.
Yeah, which is interesting, right?
But going back to that idea about it changing, right? The restoration still happening. I think it was Elder Holland who talked about the church is maturing, and so we have to mature individually as well. He asks us to grow individually. Was that Elder Holland? I think it was. The fact that we are developing as individuals as the restoration is happening. And the same way that Preach My Gospel required that stretching, this will require a little bit of stretching on the part of everybody, just a little bit.
For sure. Well, it's like Elder Holland said. Elder Holland basically said, hey, just because we're kind of loosening up reporting and changing what counts in this and that, is if you drop the ball, then this is never going to work. This does put a lot more on us, because it's not about reporting a number and just saying, yep, I did it, and moving on with your day. That's not going to cut it anymore. And the church will suffer if we don't do our job.
I gotta say, how long ago did they make the visiting teaching change? Has it been 6 months?
Which change are you talking about?
Where they took out the message and it's just now do what they need.
Oh, yeah.
That's 6 months.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been different. I mean, it's been good, but I even just after years and years of habit
you
want
a message,
a formal visit and having a message, I haven't had a problem dropping the message. But my instinct is still always to set an appointment for a formal visit. And I've really had to readjust my thinking to get around that. What does this sister need? Is it a visit? Maybe she's busy. Maybe the last thing she needs right now is a visit. So we've tried to be creative, my companion and I, but naturally my instinct still goes there, which may be appropriate. But we did a luncheon with a couple of our sisters one month just for fun. We took them out to lunch, and so we're trying to be more creative of doing things that are not so formal, just fun.
Like
I
being
love the
friends,
idea of
you know.
getting together at like an elders quorum and saying, all right, here's all the people in our ward. Who knows how so-and-so's doing? Has anybody been to see the, you know, and it's almost more assignment driven.
Well, this leads in perfectly with how they've changed the way we're supposed to do Elders Quorum and Relief Society, right? I mean, now the first Sunday of the month, which I haven't been attending. I'm not quite sure how it's going, but
Come back, Geoff. We
I'm
need
sorry.
you at church.
I would rather sing primary songs. It's much more fun. But right, isn't that kind of the purpose of now what used to be the presidency meeting, to do that very
Man,
thing?
I
Like,
hope so.
kind of hash out. Let's talk about who needs help. Let's talk about what we need to do. And now ministering plays into that. They really pulled a fast one on us here. They've been kind of putting these pieces together slowly before they just dropped the bombshells during conference and took us all by
For sure.
surprise.
Yeah.
They've been laying this groundwork for some time. It's pretty clear.
Right.
But, you know, as we all know, old habits die hard. And if you look back in 1963 is when the home teaching program as we know it was instigated. And Elder Collimore was actually the one that talked about it. He was a 70. And the whole shift from going from ward teaching to home teaching was some of these same goals, right? That, we don't just do a once a month visit. We actually get to know our families and do these things. And then, you know, how many years later, 50 years later, we're still doing that. And so this is going to be a real challenge for leaders to really say, no, that's not what we're doing. This is what we're doing now. I'm not just going to hand you a slip of paper. We're going to talk about it and really dig in to see how we can do that. But I guarantee there's going to be some wards that are saying, oh, well, it doesn't have a print option in MLS anymore, but I made up a spreadsheet at home and here, pass these around, you know? So
Oh my
hopefully
gosh,
we can
yes.
get past this.
That will be hard. Like you said, the print thing. I think if I read correctly, the assignments are supposed to be given out with companionships sitting down in one of those preliminary PPI style interviews, right?
Okay.
So they're not supposed to be handed out with slips of paper.
Well, man, I had an elders quorum president that gave me an assignment one time. He was just like, hey, this sister moved into the ward a couple of months ago. We're not sure how she's doing. Would you run by and check on her? There's this other guy who's got this situation. I just need an update on him. Will you swing by and check on him? And I mean, that was my home teaching assignment. I was like, immediately was like, yes. Oh my gosh, you want to know how they're doing? Great. Let me go find out and I'll see. Like, I can go on this errand for you. And it was this great experience that I've never had replicated in my entire existence in the church, where like I loved this idea of home teaching. I was going to go and do it. And like, imagine being given that assignment from a leader who actually cared how his people were doing and wanted to hear back on how are they. That'd be powerful.
Yeah, it's huge. That puts a lot of pressure on elders quorum presidents now. I would say more than before, because now it's like,
Thankfully, they can be high priests now. So
so they'll get it done. I mean, imagine, it's hard enough making assignments. I mean, you know, many of us right now talking have been there. I mean, that takes a lot of time and effort, but at least you had sort of the passivity of it, of just sending it to your secretary, making sure everyone receives assignments and answering questions. But now it's going to be like, nope, you're going to sit down one by one. Potentially you could delegate to counselors, I would assume, but really talk about it. But I think it's going to be powerful. I mean, we heard rumors that they were going to change this conference, but the result's pretty cool. Sisters, twin sisters. Let me ask you though, when I look at what a lot of these changes are, it seems to gel in many ways with what visiting teaching already has been. Do you feel like it's a huge fundamental change from we talked a little bit about how it changed 6 months ago. Do you feel like it's a major twist from visiting teaching? Or is it more that home teaching, what was home teaching, is sort of evolving a little bit more into the visiting teaching model, and that's kind of what we're embracing?
I feel like home teaching's moving more towards what the visiting teaching was. Other than, I think the biggest thing for visiting teaching, again, is the young women joining us, which will be awesome.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too with visiting teaching that has been different than home teaching is we didn't have to have a visit inside the home. You know, you could, it could just be sending an email. It could be sending a text, calling up, how you doing?
Right.
And you could count that as.
And it's been like that for years.
Yeah.
My husband's always been super jealous of that.
Yeah.
He's like, you guys can count anything.
And it's really, you know, kind of going back to what Al said about giving this assignment to check on this individual. It's kind of the same thing, you know, then you don't feel like, hey, I'm here to deliver a message. It's like, hey, I'm here to find out what's going on in your life. You know, can we help you out? Are you struggling with something? You know, do you want to just like hang out and go get a soda? And it's just a much more focus on the individual approach. So yes, I think the men in this situation, the men are moving more towards what the women have been doing.
It seems that way, yeah.
Because it's been successful for us sisters. We have all sorts of good friendships.
Mhm.
And I would say I wondered how much of sort of a trial this was. I don't know how long it was now, 2 years ago, when Elder Holland gave his priesthood address and he talked about, when he really talked about what actually counts as home teaching. I think a lot of guys remember this. And that was a terrific talk. Like, this was music to my ears, because he's saying, like, no, this is not about the stuff you think it is. It's just minister and love people and care about them. Everything you do counts. And I remember after that talk, it was such a watershed moment that I was meeting with the stake president, and he was actually talking about, like, okay, do we need to revamp how we actually assess measuring our home teaching? And I have to wonder, I don't, like, how planned that was in the past to sort of see how we would respond to such counsel to go forward. So I'm excited to go forward. I'm also excited to get an assignment in general, which I haven't had for a while. I just floating that out there. Anyone
Wait,
Well,
I don't have one. It's been a while, but hey.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this change is that it seemed like now that, we've got Relief Society in one room and we're going to have, the brethren, because I really liked, I can't remember who it was it Dallin H. Oaks that said, we are not referring to the men as the priesthood.
Yeah.
We are going to be men and we are going to be women. We are not going to refer to each other as the priesthood, refer to the men as the priesthood, which I love, because I cringe every time when a member of the bishopric or the bishop gets up and says, we'd like to thank the priesthood for blessing and passing the sacrament today. I'm like, no, they're the young men. They're not the priesthood. Anyway, but what I thought was so interesting was that, you're going to have the men and the women, and the men and the women, the leadership for Relief Society and the leadership for Elders Quorum are seemingly now focused on the adult individuals in their groups, because they want to free up the bishops to focus on the youth. And I thought that's kind of a real shift, to not have the adults all running to the bishop with their problems, but perhaps having the adults going to their own individual leadership, be it Relief Society or Elders Quorum, and having those things addressed there to give the bishop more time to focus on the youth. To me, that seemed like kind of a very monumental shift.
I think it's that focus. Elder Bednar was talking about it during a tour he was doing a couple years ago, about the Elders Quorum is the Melchizedek priesthood representative in the ward, and the bishop mainly is supposed to focus on issues of repentance, judge in Israel, and temporal needs, right? I think the joke was even made that then the bishop should be handling moves, not the Elders Quorum.
That's the dream.
That's a topic for a different day.
Yeah, this is going to be gnarly. Anyone else have any thoughts on this? I mean, we could probably riff on this all night, but I guess it's still kind of evolving, right? You could hear the hush in the room when President Nelson just said, "Yeah, we're done with this. We're moving on."
Dude, his style of getting up and like priming a little bit and then sitting down and letting the everybody else do the heavy lifting was so cool to watch.
It's pretty funny. He just gets up like, "This is what's happening now." Now, the only potential downside to this, you could say, like today, I loved hearing Elder Holland speak. But at the same time, because there were so many procedural talks, I guess we could say,
including his.
In some ways, I do feel like we got denied a few extra, like, Eastery, conference-y type talks, because we were talking about process. But it was still good.
Once every 3 decades, they administer to the affairs of the church. Yeah. How dare they?
It's not good enough, man. Look, you leave like Quentin L. Cook or somebody to talk about the stuff. I need the emotions. I want all the feels. There were no feels. I mean, I was even surprised. I actually thought the way that it was going with who'd spoken, that they were going to let Elder Uchtdorf speak last, like kind of as an intentional little nod, like, all right, buddy, it's been a weird ride for you the past 2 months. We're going to let you close this one out. But nope, they made him come in after all the teaching stuff when everyone had their breath taken away. Really focus.
I think he did okay.
He did great. It was awesome. But
he held his own.
I don't know if anybody else had trouble with this, but after all the big announcements, home teaching today, last night with priesthood reorganization, it was difficult for me to kind of get back in the game of just listening to conference talks like normal. I think it was hard to kind of settle back into the rhythm. I don't know.
I noticed a lot less memes from you, Geoff. The flowery quotes and you know.
You know what, this time around, this was just personal end, but the making memes takes up a little bit of time. But this was like the hardest conference of my life to get done. When I had with 2 kids and the running around and the craziness, this was the most bonkers conference weekend of my life. Actually, it was delightful. I kid you not. When they finally announced temples at the very, very end, we're like sitting down for dinner. We finished up dinner. We quickly said a prayer. And they started announcing them. Then my son spilled his entire beverage all over
what a
the floor
jerk.
and the table, and he's like crying, and the other kid's crying, and my wife's cracking up. She's like, "Right when the temples come, right when the temples come." And I'm sitting with my laptop trying to write this down and like mop something up. It was a very busy weekend.
Yeah, I have to say there was a lot more of us shushing our kids
Yeah.
this afternoon than normal. We were like, shh, shh,
Yeah.
we gotta hear this, we gotta hear this.
This is big. You don't understand.
I think our kids were confused. We were a little hyper.
Yeah, I think we were all in it.
And kind of before we leave this, you twin sisters, you said that you were pretty excited to tackle Bonnie L. Oscarson's talk related to
Yes.
this, right?
Yes.
Yes.
What was big about that one? Like dive into that. Let's
Oh, we loved it.
I loved it.
We we talked about this last night after we heard it. We both had the same take on it. We felt like it was, she's out, she's released. And so before she goes, she's got some things she wants to say.
You know, and what was really
prepared remarks.
you know, I mean, obviously she knew what changes were coming down. And so when she gave this talk in the Saturday afternoon session, you know, nobody had any idea that there were going to be readjustments in priesthood quorums. Nobody had any idea that there was going to be readjustments to home teaching and visiting teaching and just all of the changes that were coming down. We were still all reeling from the 2 new apostles we got in the morning. So, you know, as Arianne and I are listening to this talk, and she's basically, to a certain extent, calling the bishops on the carpet saying,
She's pretty direct, saying,
you're not using your young women appropriately. And I'm sitting there going, yes, yes, yes. They could do more than just babysit.
yes.
And, you know, and now looking at this talk, you know, my initial reaction, and now looking at it in light of all of the other changes that occurred, her talk made so much more
It really
sense.
fits in, yeah.
But yeah, it did. It seemed like it was kind of her parting shot as she was leaving, saying, you know, hey, use these girls.
Parting shot.
Parting shot.
I love-
Exactly.
It's like, you just released me. What now, suckers? Here we go.
I know, she's
Oh.
very passionate, and I loved the examples and ideas. You know, she was talking to the bishops and she gave them all specific ideas. She said, look at your ward council agenda. What is something on there that you can give the young women to help with? You know, they can visit elderly, they can help, you know, with moves too. They can do all kinds of things besides babysit. And last time I served in Young Women's, probably 8 or 9 years ago, and I served under a Young Women's president that had this exact same philosophy, and she was always encouraging us leaders to find something for the young women to do other than babysitting, because she just felt like they needed to feel used and they needed to feel responsible, and it was really a huge part of them developing leadership skills. And so now to hear this come from Salt Lake was refreshing.
Well, and the other thing she tied it into, which I think is so critical, because, you know, having teenage girls that are 18 and 17, so to speak, and, you know, knowing them very well and knowing their friends, she talked about that a lot of the young women struggle with anxiety, self-worth, depression. And she was speaking to the young women saying, you know, hey, you need to look outward and not inward and get involved. And so I think she was kind of talking twofold. She was talking to leadership saying, use your young women. And she was also talking to the young women saying, hey, take advantage of these opportunities. Because if you take advantage of these opportunities to serve, these really hard things that you are struggling with as a young woman, it's going to help you overcome those, or at least mitigate your feelings from all of that.
Yeah.
So
We dug it. We liked it.
I never felt like more of a dude than at the end of that. I was like, oh, that's a pretty good talk. But aren't they already doing most of that? My wife was like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, she's like, that was amazing. And she punched every dude in the face. And I was like, what? I didn't even know.
That
Like,
was
I've never even considered that like we're underutilizing the young women. Like it's just me, the dude, hanging out, like going through my world, and like had no idea that this was even something that was like that like needed to be said or was waiting to be addressed and preached. But my wife certainly did, and I was like, oh gosh, wow, let me watch that one more time.
Well, and I think that was universal for probably a lot of men in the church. You know, this wasn't anything that people were, you know, like you said, it never occurred to you that the young women might have felt underutilized. And until Sister Oscarson got up there and said it, and you turned to the woman in your life and she went, well, duh. And so I think it probably is very much a wake-up call for many men in the church to realize, hey, maybe there's more going on here than we really realize.
Yeah, I hope so.
It was strong. What about other favorite talks? Anybody have any that jumped out that you?
You know, Geoff, one thing I want to mention during the priesthood meeting that I really appreciated is just kind of different style from President Monson was, and you see a lot with President Hinckley, is he would have this, I don't know if you remember, like when he did the talk about gambling, and he was like, you know, if you're doing an office pool, that's a no-no, that's gambling, right? He was very like specific in, here's my list of things I want you to know and needs to change. And, you know, when he had this, you know, talked about as far as, you know, ways that people are using the priesthood or men are using the priesthood, they need to bless and give blessings and promise blessings. I mean, that was sort of refreshing.
That was very cool.
A good, hard direction from the prophet, and everybody saying, okay, all right, I will reevaluate there and be better at that.
Hey, I saw some disagreement about this one on Twitter though, because President Nelson mentioned how he was in a ward, a father gave a blessing, and he named the child, and then he essentially said a prayer as he described it. He didn't actually bless the girl. And I think there might be some disagreement then about what's the actual proper way to do this when naming and blessing a child. I've always been under the impression that you address Father in heaven and power of the priesthood, you name the kid, but then you pivot your remarks to
I always thought you did it the way the prophet just told you to do it. Doesn't that clear up any discussion on Twitter?
He just said you bless the kid, but there were many people who assumed that the blessing still came through like directing your remarks to Heavenly Father to invoke the blessings as opposed to talking to the child.
Because Geoff, that's the side of the argument I'm on. If you look at the handbook, nowhere in the handbook does it say that you would then address the child, right? And again, I don't think there's like, in my opinion, President Nelson was not talking about who you're addressing. He's talking about, you know, giving just these flowery, you know, broad prayers and remarks. But, you know, when I bless my two children, the whole prayer I was addressing Heavenly Father, saying, Father in heaven, bless this child that they will be strong in faith. Bless this child that they will have a keen mind, right? And I just think, to me, it's more of he was referring to the wishy-washy, like, well, I don't want to necessarily heal this person, you know, promise this or that one, because what if it doesn't happen? And so let's just sort of dance around it. And then especially in leadership callings, you know, I'd fall into this trap a lot where you'd set somebody apart and it'd be like, make sure that you go into the counsel mode, right? Like, make sure you give plenty of time for your family and you balance this. Like, no, like, bless this person that they'll be, you know, be strong in their schooling, and because of this calling, they'll see remarkable miracles come to pass, or, you know, that type of thing. That's how I took it. And to me, it wasn't even a dialogue or you know, directed towards who you're addressing in the blessing. To me, it's about the power of blessing, articulating a promise, a heavenly promise according to the priesthood. That's, I think, what it was going after.
Okay. See, that's what I'm saying. It's fair. I'm not saying he was talking about mechanics necessarily, but we want to be appropriate and proper with the way we do our ordinance.
One of the new apostles sort of spoke about that, about like, or he gave an experience of like, I think it was Elder, the Suarez, who talked about he had to go and get his visa to get to the mission, and you know, the person calling him on the mission was like, do you have faith that you can perform this miracle? And he was like, yeah, okay, now how? And man, I feel like this whole conference was a little bit of, has the day of miracles ceased? You know, I mean, we were joking about it earlier, but like legit, there's sort of a call to arms of hey guys, this is still how this is supposed to work. We're supposed to minister to people. Part of ministering is going to be blessing. And, you know, like, man, When was the last time you went and gave a blessing? Probably, I mean, for this group, maybe a little bit more recently, but most of the guys I know in high priest or elders quorum, it's been a long time since they've gone out there and given a blessing.
Well, speaking of that, like feeling of like needing to act, that was probably my favorite part of conference was President Nelson closing out priesthood session, where he just had everybody stand up one by one, and it was this whole feeling of like rise up and then to sing all together, and then like to say the prayer, everyone's standing. That was just like this very powerful, it's time to get going. Put your shoulder to the wheel, make it happen. It was awesome.
It really felt that way, didn't it? I mean, it's like, it almost felt like, hey, you've all been kind of complacent here in the waning years of the Monson administration. It's time to get up off your booties and get busy again, in a way, because it's amazing. Even though prophets speak for the Lord, of course, they bring their own personal biases and style and all kinds of things into it. It's fascinating to see how much that's changing.
Yeah, and I'll add to that regardless of what the new direction is, it's just, we tout our restored gospel as the heavens are still open, inspiration is coming, but we sort of do the same thing for years after years. And it's just so refreshing that they're shaking something up, right? Something's changing. And that, I think, can be, wards, local ward councils and states should consider that. Like, what are we doing? And we don't really remember why. It's just sort of in the tradition. Let's shake it up and make some changes. And that just re-energizes a group of
Board council as a video chat now. I like it. I like it, Kurt.
Brought to you in part by Zoom.
But for real, why not?
Right?
Well, they could benefit from some Asana training, but Kurt's done a whole seminar on that before, which is
that's right. Go to leadinglds.org now and sign up for your Asana training.
Bada bing, bada bing. Totally switching gears. I loved Elder Bednar's talk.
Oh man.
Yes, meekness.
On meekness, and I really loved it because so often Captain Moroni, it was great and he did great things, but flipping it over on his exchange with Pahoran and just being like, no, Captain Moroni he was levying inaccurate accusations, he was being unmeasured, he was upset, of course, because of his situation, and Pahoran did not respond defensively. He didn't get all mad at him and engage in this war of words and escalation. He was meek, he was measured, and he responded properly. I thought that was it's a lesson I easily forget, and it's right there in the back chapters of Alma, how important it is for us to spend the time to be meek and to take our time with how we respond to things. Even if we get crazy angry allegations, especially in the social media age, when the easiest thing in the world to do is be like, oh yeah, you think you're smart. Well, guess what? I went to Snopes and you're wrong. You're wrong, okay? It's so easy to do that. I do it, I shouldn't do it. And it's just a great reminder to take a step back and say, how can I be constructive in this situation? I loved that. It was a terrific lesson for me.
That's a powerful insight, because I mean, when you think about the number of, like, social media is a great example. The number of times that you hear or see somebody in a post say, oh, that's a great point, I hadn't considered that before, thanks for bringing that up, is zero, right? Like, nobody goes on.
This is such a good dialogue.
I mean,
they just disappear.
I'm thinking of like even conversations around like church issues right now, right? Around some of the missteps with reporting sexual abuse and stuff. I mean, all of it is like, I've decided my point of view. I'm going to shove this at the world, and anybody that disagrees with me is just picking a fight. It's like his comment was meekness could be defined as interest in learning from the Spirit and those who may seem like they don't have anything to teach you. I'm paraphrasing, but it was somewhere around there, and that just struck me as going into conversations looking to learn something. I mean, that's the Christ-like attribute. That's the thing that. Even going into some crappy sacrament meetings where all the talks are really bad, but still trying to find something to learn there. I mean, it's just such a trait or a character trait that I think is underappreciated or under talked about and discussed, that would just make a huge difference inside the church and outside the church if that were the thing that people were going into conversations with.
Another thing he said in that talk that I don't know, it just struck me because I'd never thought of this before. He said meekness is a spiritual gift. And I had really never thought of meekness being a spiritual gift that you can, essentially pray for and ask for ask the Lord for that particular spiritual gift. And we've been discussing spiritual gifts all month. In the month of March, every sacrament meeting speaker has been talking about spiritual gifts. So I think that's probably why it was on my mind and really struck me. But it just made me think, oh, this is something that I can really pray to the Lord and ask for that gift.
Amen.
Since that's like awkward pause, great. Okay. I say this, I want to preface this saying this was something I struggle with, and I was a bit disappointed with the way it was dealt with in conference, but we're here and I would love your insights, okay? So when Elder Anderson was speaking, he talked a little bit about basically, what is a prophetic voice, what is a personal opinion, right? But then the response was essentially, don't end it with a question mark, end it with an exclamation point, which is nice as far as like something you want to put on a book to, as a pull quote. But that's a discussion.
Ponderize.
Yeah, that's a big discussion to have that I think matters to a lot of people. And I admit I felt just a little disappointed because I would love lots of clarity on, when do we take it as you are speaking as Neil L. Anderson, Special Witness of Christ, versus Neil L. Anderson, lay citizen, who wrote something that just got published by Shadow Mountain and is not an official publication of the church, and where we draw that line. And we've talked about this on This Week in Mormons a few times. I don't know if this isn't a huge thing that lingers with me necessarily, but I was all excited when he brought it up, like he was actually going to get into it and say, hey, here's how you can navigate some of this. Here's some pro tips. And then the pro tip, it just kind of, for me, it fell on its face. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe no one is with me on this.
No. I think the thing that I took from it wasn't necessarily the specific answer, because I think what you're referencing is when President Nelson, it was the 80s, and there was a discussion on how does he determine the difference between what a prophet is speaking as a man or as a prophet? And he said instead he wants to know how to be more like the prophet, and he doesn't want the question marks, he wants the exclamation points. And what I took from it wasn't the specific answer of putting an exclamation point on it, but that President Nelson took some initiative to determine what he was going to make of the direction from the prophet. And I feel like a lot of the talks were talking about President Nelson and his life and his style of doing things. Yeah. And that's kind of what I took from this. Isn't necessarily this is the answer to navigate that, but look at how the prophet was an example of coming up with a solution and finding a way to make it relevant to himself. At least that is what I took from it.
I like it. Okay. Any other thoughts? Kurt's thinking hard.
Well, I think at one point, and I didn't write it down verbatim, but he said something about, if your personal views are not in line with the views of a prophet or an apostle, like, don't worry, like, don't fret or think that now you're not included. I think that's important to say that, but I get what you're saying as well, Geoff. It's nice to, because these are difficult lines when we've had, current prophets and apostles talk about past prophets and apostles and say, well, that wasn't exactly right, or not necessarily in a formal general conference setting, but many times they correct that, right? And so, I think for a lot of people it is really difficult when they have these personal views that are not necessarily in agreement with church views or maybe prophets or apostles, and that may cause them to start to feel like, oh no, well maybe I don't have a place here, and that's definitely not what we want.
No, and we don't want that at all. No one should ever feel like they don't have a place here just because of this or that. I mean, I think some clarity could be nice. But the thing that saddens me more than anything is when people feel like there's not a place for them. Yeah. At church. I think that's as much on us as individuals and the environment we create in our wards as anything else, if that happens. Who wants to tackle Brother Echo Hawk? That was a good talk.
Yeah, that was a fantastic talk about forgiveness. He told a story about his youngest brother that was killed by a drunk driver. Yeah. And I think it was his parents and his sister were there at the sentencing and went over to the family and forgave them. And that opened up the doors of forgiveness for him. And I think it's cool when general authorities can point to a moment in their own lives where they weren't good at the principle upon which they are speaking, right? So he said, he didn't go into forgiveness being difficult for him, but he talked about when it became something real to him was when he saw someone else's example. I thought that was really cool.
Did you get because I mean, as he was speaking, I kind of got the impression that he was still in the process of this. I mean, not like man, there was real pain and real hurt in those eyes still as he was sharing that story. Like, it almost seemed to me like he was being vulnerable and transparent to a point of like, I may not have this perfect right now, but here's some stuff that I picked up along the way, and really glad that I've got, you know, a good set of parents and a sister to sort of lead the charge on this, because that wasn't me, right? It wasn't him in that courtroom.
Yeah, it was emotional for sure. And I think Elder Bednar's talk on meekness, when we brought that up just now, that's what I thought of, that image of Elder Echo Hawk. He seemed very meek giving that talk. Like it was very sincere.
Yeah, it was powerful. It was. I think back to that. It didn't happen to President Hinckley. What was that story he related? Those kids who threw like a frozen turkey off an overpass.
Yeah, that's like a landmark talk from him.
Yeah, and how the woman, you know, who I think it killed her son or something. Anyway, but she forgave them. And the concept of forgiveness like that just blows my mind. Because I think it's one thing to forgive people just like this and that, but if something as tragic as someone was irresponsible to drive while drunk and it killed one of my family members, I can't imagine. Like, that's so hard to do. That's why we have the atonement. But. He
introduced a really interesting sort of precept, though, the idea of we can be forgiving and also hold people accountable.
Yeah.
I'd love more thoughts on that, because he kind of touched it a little bit and then moved on. But I think that's one of the things that is incredibly difficult to do. I mean, either as a parent or a friend or a boss or employee, or, you know, all the areas we find ourselves in, that juxtaposition of, I forgive you and I'm a forgiving person, while also letting you suffer consequences or holding you accountable.
Well, I think go ahead.
I was going to say, Al, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was just about to say that when I heard that in his talk, because I think sometimes we equate forgiveness with saying, okay, if I've forgiven you, that means what you did was okay. And that's not what forgiveness is about. Forgiveness is letting go of our anger, but just like Elder Echo Hawk said, you know, that doesn't mean that there's not accountability for the actions, and that if you have engaged in some sort of an action that has consequences, that you can forgive that person can be forgiven, but they still have to deal with the consequences of their particular action. And I'm with you, Al. I'd like to hear more of an expanse on that and how we do that. Because I think sometimes that's where people get hung up in forgiveness, is they think, well, if I forgive them, then I'm saying what they did is okay. And how to be able to balance both of those.
And also not act vindictive when assuming someone needs to suffer the consequences of the things they do wrong. And I think it's very easy to want to slide into vindictiveness, because you want them to feel it. You want them to, that's how they're going to get their sorrow, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the right thing for us to do either. Like, people need, and that's a fine, I don't know what the exact balance is to achieve that. But
it's a really thoughtful line, Wes, that you drew from Larry Echo Hawk's talk over to Elder Bednar's meekness discussion, though, man. That's actually a really thought-provoking connection for me of those two topics being related.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. And I think Elder Echo Hawk also talked about forgiving yourself. That also requires a certain level of, you know, humility to be able to like recognize your folly and forgive yourself as well. It's cool.
Yeah. And speaking from my time as a bishop, the forgiving yourself thing is the biggest issue or difficulty members have than forgiving others, especially when they do something wrong. They just get in this mode of, well, the atonement's for everybody else, and it makes sense on paper, but now that it's in my life, or that now that I really need this for forgiveness, I don't think it works, you know. So that's a crucial point to come from conference.
So Kurt,
go ahead.
As I say, Kurt, why do you think that is? You know, when you were as a bishop, why do you think that is, that people struggle so hard? They're willing to forgive others, but it's so hard to apply that same principle to themselves. Why, based on your experience as a bishop, why do you think that is?
I think it goes back to, in my opinion, Satan's most powerful tool, which is shame. when that individual walks in the bishop's office, they're not necessarily bringing in like a transgression. The bigger thing they're bringing in there is a bucket full of shame that I was one of the good guys. I grew up in the church. I'm not supposed to make this mistake. And so once that leader or they can discover how to remove that shame, then they can start to forgive themselves. But shame is so powerful because it is the counterfeit of guilt. We're supposed to feel guilt. We're supposed to think, man, I feel bad I did that. But to think, man, I feel bad I did that because now I'm broken and I can never be the person I was before. Like that shame is so it's so strong and so powerful in that process of hindering someone from progressing in the atonement. That's my opinion.
Wow.
So there's that.
So one thing we haven't even talked about is the 2 new apostles. And,
Yes.
and any thoughts therein.
I mean, the Salt Lake Tribune doesn't even know what to write tomorrow because like, man, they're
Okay, so you're hinting at something there.
Oh.
And so the so-called, I want to call it diversity quotas, right, for the brethren. Now, I did think it was very interesting that President Oaks went out of his way to talk about how like 40% of the 70 and stuff are from foreign countries. I mean, that's deliberate. They're not just doing that. Like, here's a fun stat you might be interested in. I mean, they know why they're throwing that out there. So I get the excitement. Like, I love seeing that one apostle is Asian American and Elder Suarez is Brazilian. Yeah, the first ever Latin American apostle. I think it's cool. I think it's great. I do think there's a bit of a nuanced way that it just reaches people in a certain way. They do feel represented. There's just more understanding. I get it. That's awesome. But I do struggle with the notion that like the 12 owes the church like demographic representation. Does that, if that makes sense? And we see a lot of this after when they filled the 3 vacancies a couple of years ago, and it was like 3 white guys from Utah. There were many in many circles who were just like, oh my gosh, how can the church possibly be true? Where is the revelation? Why are we still getting white dudes? And like, I don't know all the ins and outs of why that happened. So it is cool to see this, but I don't know. What do you guys make of all of that stuff? Because I get why people want to feel comfortable and see that more diversity up top. Even NPR ran a thing that said like the Mormons get more diverse. Woohoo! But I don't know. Al,
I just remember 15 years ago on my mission, some guy looking at the picture of the organization of the church, and he's like, "Are all these guys from America?" I was like, "Yeah." And he's like,
we don't have a former Soviet apostle.
Well, and now we've got a German, and it's like, no, it's an international church. There's some stuff there, but like truly as an international church and addressing the cultural impact and all these things that are there, I think we've been anxiously waiting for people of different backgrounds to come in and represent those interests in the upper echelons of leadership in the church. And so, I think it's great to have diversity of thought and diversity of opinion in those meetings. And I'm excited for where the conversation goes, because they've always been called by the Lord for what we need at that time. And we believe that. And the fact that we're introducing maybe some different dialogue in there means that maybe the church is ready for a different phase.
And I would say like that stat of 40% of the 70, I think it's part of it's just that the 70 are not as publicly known. Like there's the handful of them that, one of them gives a really cool talk.
No, we know them. We know
them. Or they
them.
get the presidency of the 70.
No, Jeff. No, we know them.
Most of them aren't very well known, except for Shane M. Bowen, who's the greatest, as everyone knows. But
way too white, Jeff. I'm sorry, he doesn't got a shot.
I know, he really does.
Other thoughts, you guys? I see a few of you.
So I'm with you, Al, until in spirit, but...
Here's what I think, just like you were talking about, several years ago, when we were filling 3 slots, of course, they got all filled by 3 white American men. And of course, I wholeheartedly believe that the Lord issues the callings. But I think the Lord issues the callings in conjunction with when people are ready for those callings. And I don't necessarily mean the church, I mean those leaders. Many of these leaders that are coming out of these, countries, like Brazil, don't have I mean, yes, Brazil has a long history with the church, but clearly not as long of a history as Utah has with the church, or, you know, America has with the church. And so I think as those countries grow, as the population grows, as the leadership there grows, those leaders are prepared, and now they are prepared to the point that they can take on more responsibility within the administration of the church. So I think that's why we're seeing it, is I think we are seeing, as these countries grow and mature in the church, the leaders grow and mature and are ready then to be called to those for those responsibilities.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because obviously the Lord calls and qualifies whomever he likes, but I do think there's something to be said that sometimes a lot of people, you don't get groomed necessarily, but yeah, like you take time not climbing the ranks, but having more experiences in leading the church in different capacities to prepare you for that role. And I think it does stand to reason that in places where the church is younger, it takes longer in essence to get up to this point where we have a Brazilian, and then at some point we might very well have a South Korean, and at some point we'll probably have a Ghanaian or what have you. But it does.
Well, I loved Elder Nelson's comment that good inspiration starts with good information. You know, that's sort of that idea of like you know, when President Monson is calling new apostles, maybe he starts with the guys that he knows, sort of thing. I don't know how that process goes, but Elder Nelson, man, that guy's been his assignments have been all over the place. And maybe he just had more people to draw from in terms of like a more diverse crowd outside of Utah.
Well, that said, they both came from the presidency of the 70, and that's been a pretty strong pool.
They seem to know. They probably go to Village
for a
Inn
while now.
together.
I've got to run some numbers, but a lot of the more recent apostolic vacancies have been filled by members of the presidency of the 70. So once you get up there, L. Whitney Clayton's like, all right, guys, I'm just hanging out here at the top. Someday. Maybe so, maybe not. I don't know. But I'm excited. I think both of them are great guys. Elder Gong is an extremely interesting and brilliant man. So
a great first joke by him as well. Just right out the gate.
Right.
You want to recite it for
What was
I
this
love
joke?
that.
What was it? About singing his kids to sleep?
Yes, and he actually sang.
Yeah,
over
and he
the pulpit. It was
Yes.
awesome.
Really broke the ice.
That's how you ingratiate yourself with the new flock. That's pretty smart. Well, we're in our later moments. Anybody else have any talks you want to highlight? Any other points that we haven't covered yet?
I think there were just like a lot of themes on like Revelation,
I got a lot.
following the prophet, and that really hit home for me. There was a talk it was actually right off the bat. I think it was, oh no, it was not. It was Sunday morning. Okay. From Larry W. Wilson. And he talked about quickening, and that was just his opening remarks, was talking about quickening and how Christ can quicken people. But I just had this feeling throughout the conference that like I was quickened. And I think that was the purpose of the conference, was to quicken the church. And a lot of it was done through, like we've been talking about, some of the procedural, policy-oriented things. Yeah. But bringing it home with Easter Sunday and focusing a little bit on Christ. And even though it was kind of hard to focus, those messages were there with, I think Elder Uchtdorf talked about it, Elder Cook, they were all like focusing this message back on, this is all about how Christ leads the church. And that's what it all comes back to, is Christ quickens. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. It's just waking up and doing the things.
Right. And I just loved President Nelson's from Sunday morning, again, on personal revelation. I just thought he really put it in our hands to kind of the call to action. Like, you should be seeking personal revelation in your lives daily. And I thought it was really inspiring and just really kind of a call to action on that we should all be doing that.
Yeah, that was another talk I was going to mention, is just this idea of when he said something to the effect of like, I've been surprised how easily the inspiration comes in this position. And I think we should all sort of assume that in our own personal inspiration experience, right? That sometimes we feel like, oh, there's just that, I prayed and prayed and prayed, and then in the 9th hour, this thought came to me, right? But it should be a daily recognition that we're constantly receiving revelation, personal revelation, and what a beautiful process that is. And we can't put that to the side or assume that those are just for the special moments, the big decisions in life, but for the day to day.
Yeah, like Elder Wilson said, he said, I'm paraphrasing, but like the arrival of a typhoon is not the time to dust off the gift of the Holy Ghost.
I loved it. He's kind of mentioned this, but he said, we will see some of God's most miraculous works between now and when he comes again. Elder Nelson did in that talk. I mean, just a great reminder that like we talked about earlier, the day of miracles hasn't ceased. I'm wondering, Elder Ballard in the very beginning when he was like, church members shouldn't hesitate to run for public office. Jeff?
Oh yeah.
Also, was it a jab at Trump when he was like, only vote for those that are willing to serve?
I took it to assume the entire conference was full of jabs at Trump and at Fox.
It's like, don't vote for people that love golf and not serving.
And I have a question for the Idaho ladies. Is it true? I heard that Elder C. Scott Grow is running for Senate up there.
That is, and we were anxiously waiting to see if he was going to be released or if they were going to let him stay, but
See if he wins or not.
Yeah.
So a standing 70 is running for state Senate.
He is. He's in my stake, and he's running for state Senate.
If he sends an email through LDS Tools,
we'll let you know.
That's a W. Craig's Wick move right there. You got to be careful.
But in Idaho is much like Utah. This race will be decided in the primary in May. There will probably be a token Democrat in November, but the token Democrat will get a token vote. So he's running against. He's got 2 or 3 other opponents, and personally, I think he probably stands a pretty good chance of winning because the population in his district is about 76,000, and it's pretty heavily Mormon. I mean, it's not heavily Mormon in the way that Utah is heavily Mormon, but it's significant. And when there is 4 or 5, at least 3 other gentlemen besides him, I think there's a total of 4 that are running to split the vote. I think he probably stands a pretty good chance. And I was very surprised.
It's going to be hard. You're like going up against the guy who's got his picture in every home in that district.
Exactly. So, we as TWiM sisters, after the May election happens, we will keep you updated as to whether or not he wins the Republican nomination. I'm kind of surprised that he could do both duties. The Senate, I should say, the legislature in Idaho, is about a 90-day legislature, so it runs about 3 months. So he'd be out of commission for about 3 months of the year, the first 3 months of the year. So if he wins.
Well, if he's in your stake, you should know him. We should get him on the show.
Right. I was just going to say that. Where's the TWiM interview?
If you want him, I'll get him. you gotta
ask him the hard-hitting questions.
Like, why are you single? Remember our interview with presidential candidates?
I'll never forget Evan McMullen. That was a good day. I want to go to bat real quick. No one's talked about Sister Aburto. I love
great.
Yes.
Wait, Robert Mortensen said he was in the meeting where they introduced Elder Grow as an emeritus already.
What? Thanks, Robert.
Wow.
I haven't heard that.
Anyway, as you were, Jeff.
Oh, okay. I heard nothing about that. Anyway, she talked about the monarch butterflies. I think this has been mentioned in the past, but I love that monarch butterflies migrate to Mexico for the winter. And they all cuddle up in these long columns of butterflies. Those columns are called a kaleidoscope, and she showed some cool pictures. It's a very simple message, but I like that it's like they're individuals. They're a kaleidoscope of butterflies. They're unified in purpose, but that does not mean that they are homogenous. And that's a great lesson for us in the church, as we read in the people of Enoch, right? They were of one heart and one mind. There was no poor among them, all that stuff. But one heart and one mind doesn't mean that you're just the same person, you're automatons, and you don't have nuances and things that make you individuals. And that's a really valuable lesson for all of us in the church, as we strive to be one as the Lord wants us to be, but to be one in purpose while still embracing who we are as individuals and not trying to preach some sort of uniform, this is the way you are as a Latter-day Saint. It's just a good message. It's a message we've heard before, but I like the way she presented it. I thought it was really useful.
Well, and I think it's a message that goes along with this overall theme of the conference, with the changes that we saw, the epic, kind of historical changes that we saw in this conference in terms of, the additions to the 12, as we talked about, the priesthood changes, the visiting, teaching, home teaching changes, where she talked about, we all need to fit in and we are all needed. And I took that as very much a theme of this conference, is that, maybe the tent is getting bigger so that all can come in and join and feel needed and fit in.
Amen. I loved it. Folks, I think we're about out of time. It's been a while.
Wait, we got to talk about alteration.
Okay.
That guy looked like he got some new set of legs, man. He was rocking and rolling.
Are you sure? Because President Nelson's so sprightly. He and Elder Oaks, like after every session, kind of got up together and just like zipped right off. And you see old Hal kind of stand up like, hey, guys, saunter. Take it easy.
He has a C-3PO sort of shuffle to him for sure.
He's been doing this already for 10 years. He's like, you just get up and walk out of the room. You don't have to go run off and hop over the barrier and shake hands.
His talk was interesting to me, though. I mean, one of the things he said, he just talked about how the Holy Ghost has spoken to my mind and heart many times about the truthfulness of these things. It was kind of for the first time, I was kind of wondering if maybe I don't know if you guys have this, but like in my mind, I'm like, well, if you're an apostle, you got your special witness. Right. And I think that probably means you saw Jesus. I mean, we can all assume you're seeing Jesus. And it was this moment where I'm like, man, maybe Elder Eyring, like maybe that's not how that goes. And maybe he's got the same tools to access as we do, to sort of interact with that special witness. It was just this really heartfelt sort of, I don't know. Yeah. An interesting aside for me of like, maybe we're in the same boat, and it, you don't get any more special than just really knowing the Holy Ghost and having that sort of spiritual gift of charity.
That was a big theme of that, man. The Holy Ghost was a big theme about learning how to interpret stuff for yourself.
Also, a lot of people were reading songs. That was really popular this time too. But am I the only one? Like, did anybody else sort of believe that? Until they were 35? Is that normal?
I don't know if I believed it like for everybody, but you kind of like, you wonder about it. I mean, yeah, I don't have a blanket statement on it, but it's something I wouldn't be surprised about, but I don't base my faith on it, Alan. Neither should you.
Honestly, that's kind of a little bit of where I was, where I was like it took me aback a second to think that, maybe he hadn't seen Jesus. Yeah, I know that probably sounds goofy, but like, it was just this very honest, sincere testimony from him that felt very familiar to me.
Well, let's DM him on Twitter, find out. See what we can learn. He's all over the Twitter. Nothing. Well, folks, if nothing else to bring before the body, I think we've had a robust discussion here tonight. Any other material? No.
Do we want to talk about everybody's favorite tie or dress?
We didn't mention the heckler.
The heckler, yes.
There's always a heckler. I don't know. I don't think much of it.
I think there was much bigger stuff going on this time than a heckler.
Right. They picked the wrong conference.
What did they say? It was stop protecting sexual predators.
That's what I heard is what was said, but I didn't catch it myself. But
and the protests this time they're around like changing the way the bishops interview kids.
Yeah.
And around the bishop or brother bishop sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, a lot of it was around that.
Maybe is he Mr. Bishop now? I don't know, but yeah, both of those are sort of prescient topics.
Yeah, and those are real issues that shouldn't be diminished, but
But it's like I wouldn't go into a Catholic church and be like, "Yeah, priest touch boys." Like, I just don't feel like that's the appropriate way of disagreeing. It feels a little disrespectful to me.
Most protesters don't have much logic they're working with, especially.
You don't go kneel in a mosque with a bunch of people and be like, "You're the worst." I mean, that's.
I don't want to get into a whole thing about it. Kurt, I'm going to push back, and I'm not going to say protesters don't have the logic, but sometimes people feel like the only way to get heard is through drastic means. opinions on
Right.
issues over which
No,
they're very passionate. But I agree. I mean, it's one thing in the sustaining of officers to just say oppose and then to work that out. But yeah, when you're just like shouting stuff to be disruptive, as is your want, I mean, okay, but that's not as in line with the tenor of the meeting itself.
They've dealt with it much better. You remember the first time? I think it was Elder Eyring that was.
Oh no, it was Uchtdorf.
It was
Uchtdorf was
President
always
Uchtdorf.
and he was like,
Sure.
"Oh, I'm sorry, what? Come again?"
Oh, also, should we talk about Oaks messing up on some of the sustainings?
Yeah. I think
Sorry,
that
President Oaks. President
bishopric
Oaks.
members everywhere feel better about when they get up and mess it up in sacrament meeting.
But have you looked at the list? Like, did you try reading them yourselves? Because I was following along because I was catching up later, and there were some tough names.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that was.
I was laughing to myself that President Uchtdorf almost always did the sustainings before, and he was probably like, "It is nice not to have to go through this." Through my German accent, have to sound off all these like Korean names and Spanish names. That was fun. President Oaks was a hoot this conference. He seemed like he was having a good time.
He was having a great time.
Yeah, he seemed like
Perma smile on that guy. He was just always like a little smirk. He knew something. Something was going on.
Well,
And his talk is one to revisit as well. That was money.
What was in his?
It's the one about the small and simple things, and also how Satan
Taking
does that
pictures
test
of
as
the
well.
sidewalk. You know.
Yeah. He used his own pictures in conference.
apparently, a member of the first presidency just walks around Salt Lake City looking for broken pavement and other municipal.
You can't send a guy to get a wide photo of that, buddy.
No, I like to believe it was actually he was walking around and he saw the cracks and said, "Ha, inspiration! I could make a metaphor of this," and that's how it all started. Not the other way around. Not I need a metaphor. I'm gonna hit the streets, see what I can find. I just like that he's taking photos of cracked pavement around Salt Lake City. Who doesn't love that?
It was a good one. It was a good one.
Anyway, folks, we're going to wrap it up here. Don't want to go on too long, but thank you very much for joining us. Of course, you can find us at thisweekinmormons.com. If you're watching this on Facebook, you are at Facebook, or facebook.com/thisweekinmormons, whatever you like. Also find us on Instagram and Twitter, and subscribe to our email list, all that jazz. But I would also, of course, like to give our other guests a chance to plug what they're doing, or I can do it for you. Kurt?
Yes, come visit me at leadinglds.org, and you can find our podcast where you listen to this podcast. And we talk all things leadership, and boy, do I have a lot of jargon to go
You got
through.
a lot to fix on your site now, buddy.
Change on my site. I'll be doing that this week. So, but also new directions to go in about PPIs and large quorums and not home teaching, but ministering. I mean, the sky's the limit with this one. So yeah, come visit us at leadinglds.org.
Sounds good. Wes?
All right. So for Talks on Talks, we can also be found wherever you find the This Week in Mormons podcast. The way that we run our show is it's based off of people sharing their experiences with conference, and it's just normal, everyday people who found some quotes or a talk that stood out to them, and then we kind of structure an interview around who you are around the quotes in the conference talk. So if anyone had any moments from conference, quotes, talks that stood out to them, you can send us an email, talksontalks@gmail.com, or check us out on Instagram or at our website, talksontalks.com, and we are interested in interviewing people who had good experiences, and I'm sure there are lots out there.
That's great, man. Thanks. Sisters, Al, you're more in-house. Anything you want to plug? Anything going on here? Anything at all?
Just keep listening to TWiM.
Okay. Sounds good. And of course, Al.
Jeff, my boy.
Hello.
We've done it again. Good to see you. Good to be with you guys.
It's been real. Really appreciate all you taking the time to join us this evening. And to those of you watching the live stream, thank you very much for your comments and participation as well. We really appreciate that. So this has been a fun little experiment. I hope we do it again sometime. And so for Al and Tiffany and Arianne and Wes and Kurt, I'm Jeff from This Week in Mormons saying, be well, be holy, and be happy.
Always.